Shabbat Shalom. I'd like to share a story I heard about a couple who becomes engaged to be married. In anticipation of their big day, they sit down with the rabbi to review the ketubah, the Jewish marriage contract. During the meeting, the bride receives a call on her cell phone and steps out of the room. The groom quickly leans into the rabbi and hands him $200 in cash. Caught off guard, the rabbi asks, "What is this for?" "Listen, Rabbi, I'll make you a deal," the groom says. "You see here in the ketubah where it says, I promise to honor, cherish, and support my wife? Why don't we just take that part out? No one will notice." The rabbi, stunned by the request, places the wad of cash in his pocket without saying a word. Feeling confident that his bribe has worked, the groom sits back comfortably in his chair. The bride enters the room, and the meeting continues. 3 months later, the bride and groom stand under the chuppah, surrounded by family and friends, anxious to witness the ceremony. When it comes time to read the ketubah, the rabbi walks to the microphone, opens the document, and begins to read. On this, the 7th day of the month of Sivan, the groom hereby promises to love his bride always, monetarily, physically, obey her every command and wish, serve her breakfast in bed every morning, and swear eternally to never look at another woman again. The groom, not understanding what has just transpired, leans into the rabbi and says, "What happened, Rabbi? I thought we had a deal." The rabbi, pointing to the bride, whispers in the groom's ear, "We did have a deal, but she made me a much better offer." What is a vow, an oath, a promise? More importantly, what are the implications of the words we use, the way in which we use them, and the intentions behind them? We are fortunate to live in a country that gives us the ability, in fact, the legal protection to speak freely. So important was free speech to our founders that they placed it at the top of the Constitution. But just because we have free speech doesn't mean that we can say whatever we want, whenever we want. In Jewish communities and in communities of faith around the world, there is an ongoing debate defining free speech versus ethical speech. The idea that although we are free to say what we want, we must also be aware of our capacity as human beings to create ideas and speak words that are immoral or unethical. Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen, better known as the Chafetz Chaim, an early 20th century rabbi and the foremost authority on Jewish law for Askenazi Jews, took this issue so seriously that he dedicated his life to preaching the dangers of using our minds to generate hateful thoughts and our mouths to transmit those negative messages. The Chafetz Chaim understood that the words we use are an extension of our being, that the words we choose a reflection of our character. Among the Chafetz Chaim's 22 books is a book entitled Shmirat HaLashon, translating literally to guarding one's tongue. And as we enter into a week of diminished happiness known as the 9 days, we heed the teachings of the Chafetz Chaim, who wrote that the Beit HaMikdash, our holy temples, were destroyed in part because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred, but also because of lashon hara, hateful or negative speech. The significance of these Torah portions, Matot and Masei, which we read as one on this particular Shabbat, is not lost on us, as we are now in the 9 days, a dark and sad time in the history of our people. There are many events that occurred during the 9 days, and we will explore those in detail next Shabbat. But the most devastating events were the destruction of both of our holy temples, leaving only the western wall, the Kotel, behind. But just like the Kotel, a symbol of hope, the 9 days of Av, culminating with Tisha B'Av next week, also gives us hope as we reflect on where we have been, what we've been through, and where we are now as a Jewish people. Over the past 5,000 years, we have been enslaved, persecuted, harassed, murdered. And in the 1940s, we were brought to the deepest, darkest depths of oblivion, only to emerge stronger, more committed, more determined, and more united. Perhaps it is because of one particular vow, one promise, a promise made by God to God's people that we would see a land flowing with milk and honey, a promise by God that God would act with compassion and save the Jewish people, a promise by God to Moses that Moses' children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren would inhabit a land of holiness. Today, I want to suggest that the miracles we have witnessed in our lifetime are an extension of our actions, an extension of our deeds, and yes, an extension of our words. If the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, fell as a result of Lashon Hara and Sinat Chinam, then it stands to reason that if we do our part in trying to guard our tongues and love our fellow man, that we will have contributed to the rebuilding of the temple when the time comes. The teachings of the Chafetz Chaim stem from a long history of words. Words by God to the Jewish people, words written by prophets who witnessed the destruction of the temples and yet through it all saw God's glory and offered hope. And in today's Haftorah, we read the words of Jeremiah, who begins with rebuking the people and ends with this divine and eternal promise. Jeremiah writes, "V'nishbata chai Adonai be'emet b'mishpat u'b'tzedakah v'hitbarchu vo goyim uvo yithalelu." And swear as the Lord lives in sincerity, justice, and righteousness, nations shall bless themselves by you. Nations shall praise themselves by you. An oath, a vow, a promise. As we read this Haftorah, we are reminded of our nation's history. On this day in 1945, our United States military dropped the atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. This act, a retaliation for the Japanese bombing of our troops at Pearl Harbor, and with the intention to bring the war to a swift end. Now, 71 years later, Japan and the United States share one of the most productive, fruitful, and friendly relationships of any two nations on earth. It is a testament to the power of humanity, an indicator of what can happen if we use our words to mend that which breaks us, and a stunning example of how we further the advancement of the human race by vowing to transform our thinking. And so, as we enter the 9 days, a time of war, of sadness, and of pain, we also reflect on the silver lining that is our beautiful world. Every time we as a nation, we as a Jewish people, we as a community stand for what is right and work together using our words, actions, and deeds to unite people, we emerge stronger and better for it. And so today, we stand at the intersection of the world, ready to take on the challenges of the day, ready to face the forces of evil that stand in our way, and ready to make the world a better place, one word at a time. Let us always remember God's promise. And in return, let us heed the words of the Torah as we read in Parshat Matot, verse 3, Ish ki daber neder l'Adonai, ohi Shabbat shuvah lesor isa al nafsho, lo yachel davaro kechol hayotze mipiv ya'aseh. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath imposing an obligation on himself, he shall not break his pledge. He must carry out all that has crossed his lips. Over the course of our history, God has made promises. God has made us vows and oaths. God has performed countless miracles. And in Parshat Matot, God reminds us of the significance of keeping a promise. God tells us that we must be careful with the words we use and the promises we make, lest we break those promises and reap the consequences of our actions. Let us remember that our words must echo the sentiments of our hearts. Our actions reflect our character, and our deeds align with our conscience. On this Shabbat, may we be blessed with clarity of mind so that we can speak the words in our heart. And may we be blessed with the opportunity to make promises we can keep. I pray that the words we speak and the actions we take will forever secure our place in a land flowing with milk and honey. In writing today's sermon, I was reminded of the verse from the song Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem of Gold, composed by prolific Israeli singer-songwriter Naomi Shemer, who wrote, Chazarnu el barot hamayim, lashuk velakikar, shofar koreh behar habayit, ba'ir ha'atika. The wells are filled again with water, the square with joyous crowds. On the Temple Mount within the city, the shofar rings out loud. Words that will forever endure. And so as we prepare ourselves for the Musaf service, let us think about our brothers and sisters in Israel who welcome in and celebrate Shabbat at the Kotel, a wall that symbolizes the spirit of the Jewish people, a spirit that will never die. And so during these 9 days of Av, a time of diminished happiness, let us remember, just as the song says, that our wells are indeed filled with water, that the square is filled with joyous crowds, all because of a promise, a vow, an oath. Words from our Creator, words that inspire us to be forever dedicated to rebuilding our Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. Chazarnu el borot המים, לשוק ולכיכר, שופר קורא בהר הבית, בעיר העתיקה, ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, הלא לכל שירייך אני כינור. שבת שלום.